Last week we spent some time, we looked at Daniel's prayer last week in Daniel chapter 9. A great part of the chapter is spent recording Daniel's prayer. And if you were in the meeting last week, you will remember that we looked at the indicators. There are some indications in this prayer that Daniel was very concerned because of the vision he had had previously. This experience in chapter 9 was several years later, but from all the little indicators, we saw several indicators in the chapter which suggests that he was concerned about the prophecy, the vision he had in chapter 8, the vision concerning the 2,300 days. Now, I want to repeat that Seventh-day Adventists believe that this vision here in chapter 9 is connected to the vision of chapter 8. They believe that the angel came back to give Daniel understanding so he could understand the vision which he had in chapter 8. But I have to tell you that most other Christians do not agree. All right, you know that most other Christians, they think that Daniel 8 was focused on the history of the Jews in the time of the Greeks. And so they see chapter 9 as a completely different experience. They don't see a connection between Daniel's prayer and what happened in chapter 8, the vision of chapter 8. They think it's completely disconnected. And as we have been studying together, you know, I don't believe that. I'm far more sympathetic to the position of the Seventh-day Adventist movement. And I'm always a little bit apologetic when I say things like this. The reason being, I don't want anybody to listen to this video and think that I am biased because it's an Adventist interpretation. I mean, there are some people who will say that, right? They will say people have come on YouTube and they have said, I still have my Adventist, I'm still infected with Adventist thinking. And of course, I like to think that I'm open-minded. I like to think that I'm dealing with each thing on its merit. I don't like the idea that I might be biased in how I'm coming to the Bible because of my background. You know, I suppose you could say there's nobody who is really possessing a truly open mind. We're all a little bit biased by the things we understand. Brother Gerald, I don't know if you want to say something. I have a little feedback. I'm going to mute you, but if you want to say something, go ahead and say it now. All right, Brother Jerry, I'm going to mute you. I think you accidentally have your mic open. Okay, so just a little, just some general statements. So that's what I'm saying. I am going to try to highlight this evening what I believe to be true, and it's going to be pretty much very similar to what Adventists believe. I've said many times that I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are some things that I think Adventists teach that I believe they are solidly scriptural. I'm going to hold on to those. But I have no reluctance at all in throwing away what I don't see to be scriptural. I hope so. I'm saying that because I hope everybody can understand that. I try not to be biased. So therefore, what I'm going to share with you is what I honestly believe in my conscience is what the Bible is saying. All right. I think you all understand this, but I just feel like sometimes I have to say it again because we're not the only people who are involved. There are other people who probably watch these videos and they have their own ideas as well. So I want to just kind of make some kind of disclaimers. All right, so we go to the Bible, and I want to go to the book of Daniel, What am I doing? Daniel. And we're going to go to chapter 9. So, what we did see from last week was that Daniel is concerned. And why is he concerned? It's because Jeremiah had prophesied that 70 years would be the time that the Jews would be in captivity. Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. And the 70 years are just about finished by this time when Daniel is having this vision. The 70 years are just about finished. And then in the previous vision, an angel, Daniel heard the message, 2,300 days. Daniel heard the message, it shall be for many days. Daniel heard the message, it shall be at the time of the end. And so he's very confused, which I pointed out last week. He's confused. What is going on? Is God adding to their time? Have they been so wicked, so disobedient that God is now adding to the time of their punishment? And so he comes in Daniel chapter 9 and he makes a long prayer, confessing his sins and confessing the sins of his people. And down towards the end, you can see that he's a little bit, you can see what he's concerned about, because in verse 17, he says, O our God, hear the prayer of thy servant and his supplications, and cause thy face to shine upon thy sanctuary that is desolate for the Lord's sake. Last week, again, we pointed out that Daniel never understood the truth about the spiritual application of the sanctuary. When Daniel heard about the little horn casting down the sanctuary and the sanctuary being desolate, he was thinking of the sanctuary in Jerusalem. That was his understanding. And so he's concerned that this sanctuary is not going to be rebuilt. And so he comes and he says, Lord, hear my prayer. Cause your face to shine upon your sanctuary. In other words, turn away from this disaster that has happened. Let your sanctuary be rebuilt for the Lord's sake, for your sake. So he's asking God, don't change from the 70 years. Let there be an end to this time that your sanctuary has been cast down. And I think that probably is one of the most important things for us to keep in mind, that we are talking about two different interpretations. We are talking about the interpretation of Daniel and the Jews, who were looking at everything from an old covenant perspective. Everything was physical, material, temporal in the old covenant. That is how they are seeing things. We are looking at the book of Daniel and we have a broader picture. We are seeing that these prophecies apply to the new covenant era. And so we have to think about the greater meaning of these symbols, the greater sanctuary, the greater kingdom, the greater king, the spiritual people, everything. We interpret it in a spiritual way, in a new covenant way. But Daniel didn't understand. So while he's praying, he says, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation, about the time that he would normally pray in the evening. Gabriel came to him and he told him and said, when you began to pray, at the beginning of thy supplications, the commandment came forth. I was commanded. God gave him a command. And I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. And this was another pointer that we looked at last week. He says, understand the matter and consider the vision. Now, I'm going to, if you look at the right panel, I'm going to go back to just something that was stated last week. We mentioned this. I'm going to look at it again. If you look at the last part of Daniel chapter 8, in the right panel here, it says, I, Daniel, fainted and I was sick certain days. Afterwards, I rose up and I did the king's business. And I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. That's the last thing that Daniel says in chapter 8. Now, in chapter 9, the angel comes and he says, understand the matter. Remember, in the previous chapter, we just saw it. Remember, he says, nobody understood the vision. And I think he particularly means, I, Daniel, didn't understand the vision. Now, in chapter 9, the angel comes and tells him, consider the vision. And basically, he's saying, I'm going to make you understand the thing that you didn't understand. And I want you to consider the vision. All right. So, what we're going to look at now is the vision or the explanation of the angel. The angel is about to explain it. First of all, I'm going to read through these verses, then I'm going to put up some charts on the screen so that we can understand what the explanation is, so we can understand it better. All right? But let me read through first. He says, 70 weeks are determined upon your people and upon your holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. I'll do a running explanation as we go through, but I think we still will need the charts. So this is the critical point. Let me see if I can find another translation of the Bible here. All right. In the King James Version, it says 70 weeks are determined. This word determined is an interesting word. In the NASB, it says 70 weeks have been decreed for your people. All right. I'm going to look and see if I see another translation that would kind of give me the meaning I'm looking for. Maybe I won't find it, but let me just look quickly. Yeah, I don't see exactly what I'm looking for. I'm seeing decreed, and that seems to be what most versions are saying, decreed. Anyway, what Adventists have suggested is that the word determined, it implies cut off. 70 weeks are cut off. And so what they say is that the time we are looking at is the 2,300 days. Remember, the angel had said in chapter 8, Daniel had been told that there would be 2,300 days, then the sanctuary would be restored, or cleansed, or justified, or vindicated. Now, what they say is that the angel Gabriel says to Daniel, 70 weeks are cut off from the 2,300 years. So what they do, they try to tie this chapter, this statement here with the 2,300 days, and they say the word should be cut off. I mention it. I'm not going to make a big thing about that because I don't see any of the other versions that give me the meaning of cut off. They say decreed, which can imply the same thing, but let me see. The word, well, actually, look at this. In the Greek, in the Hebrew, the word is chatak. And I know you can't see the meaning there, but it says, it means to cut off. It means to cut off. And figuratively, it means to decree. So I guess both decree and cut off is a legitimate interpretation. All right, so Adventists are not really off when they say it means to be cut off. Anyway, what it is saying is that you take the 2,300 days or the 2,300 years and you cut off 70 weeks. Now, first of all, I know we never emphasized this a lot. We didn't. But I kind of assumed that everybody understood that in many of these prophecies, a day is used to represent a year. I think we didn't spend a lot of time looking at that. And maybe another time we need to go back and look at why do we conclude this. But anyway, this passage itself, this very chapter that we are studying, is a great chapter to bring out that point. I know I was having a discussion with somebody on Facebook a few years ago, and the person said, everywhere that Adventists say that a day means a year, they are twisting the scriptures. There's nowhere in the Bible the person said that a day is used for a year. Nowhere in the prophecies. And I took the person to this passage of the 70 weeks, and I said, what about this passage? It's very clear in this passage that one day is being used to represent a year. And the person said, well, he never really studied this prophecy, so he cannot say. Anyway, I think as we look at it together, you will see why this passage, above all others, is very clearly showing that a day is used for a year. Now, if a day is used for a year, which we're going to demonstrate, how much is 70 weeks? 70 weeks is 70 times 7, which I think works out to 490, right? 70 times 7, 7 7 is 49, 740, 490 years. So what Gabriel is saying to Daniel is that 490 years are decreed, are cut off upon your people. When it says upon your people, it is clearly speaking about the Jews, right? The Jews were Daniel's people. Upon your holy city, that is Jerusalem. Now, it's very striking what the angel said to Daniel would happen in those 70 weeks. It was to finish the transgression. That's interesting because you can look at this in two ways. If you were Daniel and you were looking at this, I'm going to tell you what you would understand. You would understand that the Jews would stop transgressing against God. That's what you would understand. And to make an end of sins, you would understand that the Jews would stop committing sin. To make reconciliation for iniquity. In Daniel's understanding, in the Old Covenant understanding, to make reconciliation for iniquity, it would mean that you have to suffer. You have to be punished for your sins, right? That is what the Jews were going through. Being in Babylon, they were making reconciliation for their iniquity in a sense. That is the kind of Old Covenant understanding. When it says to bring in everlasting righteousness, Daniel would understand this to mean that the Jews would become righteous forever. And it says, and to seal up the vision and the prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. I don't know how you would understand this, but I think we can understand it much better than Daniel could. Anyway, you know what is interesting? When I began to study this prophecy, I understood it just like how the Jews would have understood it. I thought it was saying that a time was coming. In fact, it wasn't fully my fault because this is what I learned from my teachings, the books I read, and the documents I studied, learning this in the Adventist way. They said that God's plan, he was saying to the Jews, I'm giving you 490 years for you to stop committing sin. I'm giving you 490 years for you to stop carrying on your abominable behavior. And if you don't do it in 490 years, then I'm going to turn away from you. That's what I was taught. So I was looking at it very much like how the Jews look at it. But it was absolutely not the meaning of it. And it was when I came to understand the gift of Jesus that I understood what the verse is saying. God was saying to the Jews, I'm giving you 490 more years for the Jews to fulfill their destiny. What was the destiny of the Jews? The destiny of the Jews was to produce the Messiah. in the history of the Jews, somebody was going to come to make an end of sin, to make reconciliation for iniquity. Somebody was going to come who would bring in everlasting righteousness. This is the meaning of the prophecy. It was a prophecy of the Messiah. It was a prophecy of the coming of Jesus. It was not a prophecy about what the Jews would accomplish. It was about what the Messiah would accomplish.
Hey, David,
Yes, Brother Al, go ahead.
I just have a question on this, and I've thought about it quite a bit. Is this why the Jews, after Babylon, became so strict that they were trying to fulfill this prophecy?
I, 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 it may not have had to do with this particular prophecy, Brother Al, but I understand your question, and I was almost tempted to comment on it. So you give me an opportunity to comment on it because what you say is absolutely true. After they left Babylon, the Jews became hyper legalistic. The Pharisees and the scribes were the product of this hyper legalism. They decided that they had been punished for 70 years. They were made captives in a strange land. God punished them for 70 years, and they made up their minds that they would never again give God a reason to do it. So they became strict about keeping the law to the point where they became ridiculous. If you read the things that they did, when you look at the Gospels, you can see that they were hyper legalistic and they thought it was righteousness. So it's kind of like so ironic. In trying to please God, in trying to make sure that they never went back to the same level of degradation, they went in the other direction. And the whole point is because they never ever understood that the way to righteousness was to seek it in God instead of in themselves.
Bro, David.
This this is the fruit. I hear you, Brother Cliff. This is the fruit of law orientation all the time. You become fixated upon what you can do and what you must do, and you grow further and further away from God in the search for pleasing God. Tragic, but true. Yes, Brother Cliff.
I actually spoke to a young man who was a Jew, and just in joking back, not joking, but talking lightly about Judaism. I jokingly said, so what would it take for me to convert to be a Jew? He said, you don't want to do that. He says the rules are getting more and more ridiculous. They keep adding to it. I said, you keep adding to it? Yes, he says there's about 6 or 7 thousand rules, and as each patriot or as each elder gets older, they come up with something new to add to it. So he said, you don't want to become a Jew. It's too hard. Don't do it.
Thank you, Brother Cliff. And it's what we have been saying. When you think that your behavior is the way to please God, how do you become better? You add more behaviors. How do you please God better? You add more behaviors. I I I I am kind of aware of it because I was on that road at one time. When I just became a Christian, well, I started out reading the book Counsels on Diet and Foods. That was one of my earliest books. And I went on 2 meals a day. Right? I was young, I was vibrant, I was playing soccer. I went on 2 meals a day. I started to break down. I I wasn't able to manage, and I tried to find everything that I should do. I wanted to please God. Everything that I should do, every additional rule, I went for it. I put myself under a lot of strain and stress, even though I was trying to please God with a genuine spirit. But the thing is, how do you keep up? Where do the rules become enough? I remember listening to a sermon by a brother where he says, do not even lick your fingers between meals. That is the way you go when you try to please God through your performance. So I can understand that the Jews are on that road, and it will never stop. So praise God for Jesus. Praise God for Jesus. So the Jews were supposed to be the Jewish nation. I like to express it this way. The destiny of the Jews, the destiny of Israel was to produce the Messiah. That was the purpose of the Jewish nation. They were the incubator for the Son of God. The Son of God was to come to this planet and carry out the purposes of God. And God produced an environment to prepare for the coming of his Son. This was the Jewish nation. The great misconception of the Jews and many people was to think that the Jews themselves were the special element. This fake idea, this perverted idea makes God appear to be a racist, and it still prevails very, very largely in the Christian world today. But this beautiful verse here, Daniel 9, verse 24, it's one of the beautiful verses that foretells the ministry and the mission of the Messiah. He will finish the transgression. He did it. He made an end of sins according to Hebrews chapter, let me read it in Hebrews chapter 9. In Hebrews 9, it says in about verse 26. Let me read it in the King James Version. It says, now once in the end of the world hath he appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. That is what Jesus did. He made an end of sin. And that's exactly what Daniel had foretold. That's what Gabriel told Daniel. He will make an end of sin. He will make reconciliation for iniquity. Who could have done that? Only Jesus. Nobody can make reconciliation for iniquity. Jesus paid the price. He brought in everlasting righteousness because he in himself, he brought into the human race the righteousness of God. This is the righteousness we receive in Jesus. And when it says to seal up the vision and the prophecy, this is an interesting phrase. Seal up which vision? Seal up which prophecy? What does the phrase seal up mean? It means to certify something, to establish something. Now, remember that the angel Gabriel has come to give Daniel understanding of the prophecy of Daniel chapter 8. So when the angel says the coming of Jesus will seal up the vision, it seems to me what he's saying is that this 70 weeks that I'm telling you about, this 490 years, it will be a seal that will certify the rest of the prophecy. Again, I'm saying that this is how Adventists look at it, but it makes a lot of sense to me. All right? To anoint the most holy, Jesus was the most holy one. Also, it was the anointing of him. He was anointed to his ministry as our high priest. So all of this was fulfilled. Jesus was glorified to be our high priest. All of this was fulfilled. Now, the angel says then, okay, I'm going to go a little more quickly through this and then we'll go to the actual chart. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again on the wall, even in troublous times. What I really should have here is a chart and the Bible side by side. It's a little challenging for me to do it on this platform. I need to have prepared carefully beforehand. But anyway, it would have been nice if my pen was still working. But anyway, there is a reason why the angel tells Daniel the time period in this very strange way. Look at what he says. 7 weeks. Then he says, 62 weeks, that's 62 weeks. 7 plus 62 is 69. Remember, the overall time period is how much? 70 weeks. Now the angel splits up the time into 3 pieces. He says 7 weeks, then he says 62 weeks, and we are aware that there's still another third week, another third element left, the 1 week. So it's 7 plus 62 plus 1. You'll be thinking, man, the angel likes to make things complicated, but it's not that. It's God deliberately dividing up the time period so we can understand how things happen, the progression of events. So when he says 7 weeks, something is to happen in that 7 weeks. Then he says 62 weeks, something is to happen in that 62 weeks. Then there is another week that is left. Let us see how it is divided up. And if you just read and you are not following carefully, it can confuse you. I know that I was confused for a while. And then I looked at it very carefully and I kind of figured it out. Now, he says, it shall be 7 weeks. That 7 weeks applies to the first thing the angel says. The street shall be built again and the wall, even in troublous times. This takes place during the first 7 weeks. And 7 weeks, of course, would be 7 sevens, 49 years. So 49 years would pass, the first 7 weeks, and in this time, the Jews would rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and they would rebuild the streets of Jerusalem. Then, the next time period is 62 weeks or 62 weeks. So he says, and after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. So you have to add 7 weeks to this 62 weeks, and you get when Messiah would be cut off. My thought was, hold on. It says Messiah will be cut off after 62 weeks. That means that 62 weeks would pass and then Jesus would come. But no, it's not 62 weeks, it's 62 plus 7. It's 69 weeks. After 69 weeks from the starting point. If you don't understand this, I'm going to go to the chart shortly and you will see. He would be cut off, but not for himself. All right, let me just quickly jump to the chart so that we can kind of clear that up. I don't know. Are you able to read the text? All right, Brother Ian says yes. All right. So now the first thing, if you look at the left-hand side of the chart, there are 3 little statements there. 537 BC, Cyrus's decree. 519 BC, Darius's decree. 457 BC, Artaxerxes' decree. Why are these dates put here? It's because the angel says, from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem. A commandment was given that Jerusalem should be rebuilt. And when you look at the Bible, there were actually 3 commandments. One given by Cyrus, one given by Darius, one given by Artaxerxes. Now, why 3 commands? Because when Cyrus gave his decree, they started and they stopped. When Darius gave his decree, it was limited to only a certain part of the rebuilding process. But it was when Artaxerxes gave his decree that the entire process was able to take place. So most commentators will start with Artaxerxes' decree, even non-Adventists. They say we are to start at the time of Artaxerxes. So look at the chart. On the top diagonal line says 70 weeks or 490 years. So that goes from Artaxerxes' decree right down to the end of the 70 weeks or the 490 years. But see, it is divided up into 69 weeks plus 1 week. And if you go down to the next level, the third level, it says 7 weeks. And it says 408 BC, Jerusalem is rebuilt. Then you have 62 weeks. and then the Messiah is anointed. That leaves you with 1 week or 7 years, because when the Messiah is anointed, that takes you to 69 weeks. 7 plus 62, that's 69. One is left. And at the end of that time, the period given to the Jews would be over. Let me give you another chart that gives you probably a better picture. All right, this one should be, it's more graphic, should be more palatable. All right, the first arc at the top. On the 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. This is the Adventist interpretation. All right, but we want to look at the second arc within this time period. 70 weeks are determined upon your people. From 457 BC takes you to AD 34. In the first 7 weeks, the walls of Jerusalem are rebuilt. Then 62 more weeks pass, and the Messiah is anointed. And then you come to AD 34, the Messiah, the end of the 70 weeks. The time of the Jews is over. But the 2,300-day prophecy goes way into the future, way past the time of the Jews. If the Adventist interpretation is right, if it is right, this 2,300 days prophecy only takes you way up to 1844. But the time appointed to the Jews, the time cut off for the Jews, was only 490 years out of that time, or 70 weeks. Let me pause a little bit to find out if there is any question about this, anything that anybody doesn't understand. I'm trying to explain it as I understand it, but I don't know if I'm leaving you behind or I'm confusing you. If I am, tell me. If you are good, praise the Lord. All right, praise the Lord if we're understanding. Now, it says in verse 26, back to Daniel 9. It says, after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. Now, was the Messiah cut off after the 62 weeks? No, he was anointed immediately after the 62 weeks. But what I understand is to be saying is that after the 62-week time period, after the 69 weeks, in the following week, during the following week, the Messiah is going to be cut off. But not for himself. Of course, he wasn't cut off for himself. He was cut off for us. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. What is this talking about? Clearly, it's talking about the Romans. The prince that came was the Roman general Titus. The people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The Romans did this. It's interesting that you notice that the angel mentions a sanctuary, because this was the burden of Daniel's heart. I tell you, when he's listening to this, he must have been even more confused. His heart must be falling apart, because he's concerned about the sanctuary. And here the angel tells him that not only, I mean, the Jews are going to have a certain time period, and then their time will be over. And this prince, this prince who is going to come, he's going to cut off the Messiah, and then he's going to destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. It's talking about the fact that Jerusalem would be made desolate. The Spirit of God would depart from Jerusalem, and the end of it would be with an overwhelming flood. It is said that during the destruction of Jerusalem, over 1 million Jews perished. I live in a country where presently there are about 2.7 million people living in Jamaica.
Brother David, is the flood symbolic? Sorry to interrupt. Is that symbolic, the flood?
Absolutely. Of course, it's not a flood of water, but it means, the flood is used here in the sense of something that overflows and destroys. Meaning the way the Romans came, they completely overran the land of Judea. They wiped out everything and everybody. And as I said, over 1 million Jews died. This would be almost half the population of Jamaica. I can't imagine so many people dying in one war. Anyway, now the next verse says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Now, this verse is the foundation of one of the biggest, I don't know what to call it. I'm going to call it a con man's trick. One of the biggest, I don't know how to describe it. In the Christian world, there is an understanding of this particular verse that I'm going to explain it to all of us. I'm going to try my best to break it down. But while I'm explaining it, I want you to understand this is a falsehood. It is not the truth. When I come to it, I will explain. It's one of the biggest. I am amazed even today, even though I've known about this interpretation for many years. But the people who believe in the rapture, I'm going to explain what they mean, what they believe this verse to be saying. But a lot is dependent on who is this he. He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Who is the he? There are two princes mentioned in the verse before. Look at the verse before. After 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. Then it says, it speaks about the prince that shall come. So there are two princes. Let me say, why do I say the Messiah is the prince? Because in the previous verse it says, unto the Messiah the prince shall be 7 weeks. So Messiah is referred to as a prince here. Messiah the prince. After 62 weeks, that is after 69 weeks, Messiah the prince shall be cut off. But another prince shall come, and the people of this prince shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Now it says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Who is the he? Which of the princes is the he? Now, when it says he will confirm the covenant, I believe that the he refers to the Messiah, the prince. The Messiah, the prince, will confirm the covenant with who? With the Jews. The covenant of being God's people and being special recipients of God's grace, it was belonging to the Jews until the end of this time, because the angel said 70 weeks are determined upon your people. Until that time came to an end, they were still God's people. Now the Messiah came at the end of week number 69, and for 1 week he confirmed this covenant with many, with the Jews. What did Jesus say when he was here? I am not sent but to who? The lost sheep of the house of Israel.
Brother David, one more question, so I can interrupt. This is very interesting. So when he
Sure.
said he confirmed the covenant with many for 1 week, would this also imply that he confirmed that the law was done with right there because he fulfilled it? Sorry.
I don't think so. I think that when Jesus was here, he began to open their eyes to a greater meaning to the law. But remember, while Jesus was here, he says, think not that I'm come to destroy the law or the prophets. I'm not come to destroy. I've come to fulfill. He says, not one jot or one tittle shall pass from the law until all be fulfilled. So he confirmed the covenant of the law. He was saying to them that what God said in the law, it applies until everything is fulfilled. So he really did confirm that covenant that God made with them. He didn't take it away from them, and he didn't make them no more God's people. Everything was fulfilled first, and he would do it for 1 week.
Okay, so that's what the South. So I'm right. I'm on the right track. So that means that when he confirmed that the covenant, he confirmed that it was done right there,
No, it doesn't
right?
say
It was going to be done, but it was not done until he died. it says, in the midst of the week. Which week are we talking about? We're talking about the last week, the last 7 years. In the midst of the week, he, that is the Messiah, the Prince, he shall cause the sacrifice and the offering to cease. How did he do this? When Jesus died, the veil of the temple was torn in two. This means that the sacrifices and the offerings that were being offered by the Jews had come to an end forever. The covenant was with them was confirmed, but their time was over, right? He shall cause the sacrifice and the offering to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate. What was the last thing that Jesus said to the Jews? Well, it wasn't the last thing, but what did he say to the Jews? Let me just go to that verse very quickly. It's in Matthew chapter 23, I believe. In Matthew 23, look at what Jesus says to the Jews here.
While you're looking for that, Brother David,
Yes.
you didn't explain that he confirmed the covenant with many for 1 week, but in the midst of the week he was cut off, and you said that when he was cut off, he actually fulfilled the covenant with the Jews, but it
Yes.
went on for the entire week.
Right. So I'm going to comment on it, because there of course there's a technicality there that you're pointing out, because it would seem like it would be 69.5 weeks that he confirmed the covenant. And that is a little technicality. I'm going to comment on it. But just look at where it says, for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate. This is what Jesus says to the Jews. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. He uses the very word. So there are many elements in the verse that seem to suggest that it is talking about the Messiah, the Prince. He left Jerusalem desolate. He left Judea. He left Jewry desolate, even until the consummation. And that which is determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So, from our perspective, from my perspective, from our perspective, I am saying our advisedly. I'm still thinking along the line of, this is what Adventists believe. From that perspective, I believe that it is correct to say that this he is the Messiah.
Hey, David, I have a question.
Yes, Brother Al.
Okay, I understand where you say that he is Christ. I believe so too. But the second prince that it talks about in 26, it doesn't say that the prince will come. It says the people of the prince will come. So if that was talking about that prince, should that not say, and they will confirm, instead of just the prince?
It should. It should. That's a point that should be considered. They will say that the prince is mentioned. It's his people who will destroy the city, but it's he himself who would make this covenant with the people for 1 week.
Hmm.
Let me comment on what Brother Ian said. Now, what Brother Ian is pointing out is that if the Messiah is cut off in the midst of the week, how did he confirm the covenant for 1 week if he himself was cut off? And we do teach that the old covenant came to an end at the death of Christ. Well, the explanation is not a perfect explanation, but let me share it anyway. What it is said is that even though technically the old covenant came to an end, for a while after the death of Christ, the preaching continued almost exclusively to the Jews. That God continued to give the Jews a further period of special attention. And even though history does not tell us how long it was, it is assumed that this time was about 3.5 years. Now, this would mean that it continued until a certain significant event. Adventists say it continued until the time that Stephen was stoned, because when Stephen was stoned, the gospel was scattered all over the place. The believers went all over the place preaching to the Gentiles. So they would say that at that point, it was no longer going only to the Jews, it also went to the Gentiles. However, it's kind of speculation. I could look at some other events that seem to be more appropriate. For example, when did the church come to understand that the Gentiles also were given salvation? When did they come to understand? It was when Peter had the vision on the house, wasn't it? It was that time that God gave him the vision about the animals let down. And it was that time that God said, at that time they declared in wonder, then has God also granted salvation to the Gentiles? So I could say that that is a more appropriate time. But again, I could say also, maybe it was when God called Paul, because he called a man and appointed him specifically to go to the Gentiles. And you could say Paul was the greatest reason why the gospel spread among the Gentiles. So the best I can say is one of those events. But what we know is that even after Jesus died, almost exclusively, the gospel continued to go to the Jews for a couple of years afterwards. So it's the covenant in this sense was still confirmed with the Jews. But there came an event, and we're going to assume that it was 3.5 years later. There came an event that marked the time when the Jews, God was ended in his work for the Jews, and he was going to the Gentiles. So it's not the most satisfactory answer, but it will do. Let me put it that way. It will do. It kind of makes sense. All right. And the rest of the prophecy is so perfect that we can afford a little bit of leeway there, I think. Now let me go back to my chart, because I want to look at the non-Adventist interpretation. All right. I want to look at the non-Adventist interpretation. I'm not going to be promoting false doctrines, but the thing is that sometimes it's when you look at what other people believe that you really can value what you have. All right. I'm not being smug or arrogant, but I want us to look at it, and you can help me to marvel that the Christian world, by and large, this is what they believe. Now, let me give myself a little more space here. All right. Now, what we're going to do now is look at the belief of those who believe in the rapture. Let me see. Let me get a highlighter here. All right, great. It will work. Oh no. Let me get rid of that. I don't want that on my screen. Let me change my color. Maybe use this. Right, that's more visible. All right. So this is the interpretation of those who believe in the rapture. Those who believe in the rapture. I'm going to show you their interpretation based on the prophecy that we just looked at. Now, for the first part of the prophecy, amazingly, they are very much in agreement with Adventists. See, they have up here the first 69 weeks. First 69 weeks. Oh, come on. It won't mark. Oh, yeah, there it is. First 69 weeks, all right? So they have the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, just like we have. They have the coming of the Messiah, the Prince, just like we have. Where they break apart is that they say the Prince that should come, the He, is not referring to Jesus, it's referring to the Antichrist. Remember, it says, He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Now, they say the 70th week, the last week out of the 70 weeks, they say 69 weeks brings you to Christ. The last week, the last 7 years, has not yet been fulfilled. Mark that crazy point. I'm not disrespecting people, but to be truthful, brothers and sisters, I have to say it's a crazy point. What they say is that there is a great gap. See here? Proposed time gap. They say from the time that Jesus was killed God put the prophecy on pause. God suspended the prophecy. And from that time, we have been living in a gap. There's a gap, proposed time gap. There's a gap where God stopped dealing with the Jews. And this time gap, they call it the time of the Gentiles. So during this time period, from the time when Jesus was cut off until sometime in the future, God put the prophecy on suspended animation. The prophecy just stopped, and he put a big gap between week number 69 and week number 70. How do they come to this conclusion? Because in order to fulfill their interpretation of the prophecy, it has to be that way. So they have just dropped a gap in there of nearly 2,000 years, more than 2,000, about 2,000 years. They have dropped a gap in there just because it is necessary to fulfill their interpretation of the prophecy. So if you look at where it says 70th week over here, what they say is now the Antichrist makes this covenant with Israel. If you can read the writing here, he makes a covenant with Israel. And in the middle of this week, this 70th week, he will break his covenant with Israel. Remember, when he says Israel here, he means the Jews. They mean the Jews. This is why they believe that the Jews are going to come back as in God's special favor. They believe the Jews are still God's special people. And in that last 70th week, God is going to go back to dealing with the Jews. What will happen to the Gentiles? They believe that the Gentiles are going to be raptured at this point. We're going to be taken out of this world, raptured away, secret rapture, right? And now God goes back to dealing with the Jews, and in that time, he will make a covenant. This Antichrist will make a covenant with the Jews, and after 3.5 years, he will set up something called the abomination of desolation. He will break the covenant with the Jews, and he will set up something called the abomination of desolation. And there will be 3.5 years of great persecution for the Jews. At this time, if you are not a Jew, as we would say in Jamaica, dog, nyam your supper, because the Gentile church is already gone. God is dealing with the Jews at this time. So you Gentiles have nothing. Okay? God is not dealing with you. The Gentiles who are left are going to be the enemies of the Jews. So this is the belief that arises from the idea that the he is the Antichrist. So I want to emphasize the point that the first part of the prophecy, pretty much everybody agrees that it is fulfilled unto the coming of Jesus, because they have to, because it clearly says it's a prophecy that applies. 70 weeks are determined upon your people. This is why it's very clear that here a day applies to a year, because you can't get away from it when you study this prophecy. The 70 weeks is 490 years. You can't get away from it. If you don't put 490 years, you can't come to the Messiah. You start from the rebuilding of Jerusalem, and you can clearly go back to history and see that from the time the commandment went to build Jerusalem unto the coming of the Messiah, it was the 483 years, 490 years. It was in that period. So it's very clear, beyond controversy, beyond debate. In this passage, a day represents a year. Anybody tells you that the principle of a day for a year is not in prophecy, you take them to this prophecy. It's impossible to escape it. It's right here. Where the break comes is where it comes to the 70th week. We believe it's one prophecy, cohesive, from week 69 straight into week number 70. Those who believe in the rapture, they have put in a gap of 2,000 years. They have arbitrarily, well, thankfully, whoever made up this chart, they said it's a proposed time gap. All right, it's a proposition they make. At least they are good enough to tell you that it's not something that exists, but it's something they are proposing, right? It's a proposed time gap. So, but it is an interpretation that is widely taught among all those who believe in the secret rapture. Having said that, let me go back to the Bible so we can look at what the Bible says again and kind of compare it to what we just discussed. So look at it again. I saw where somebody asked, what do they do with the 2300 days? What they do with the 2300 days is that they say it has nothing to do with the end of time. They say that the 2300 days was dealing with the time of Antiochus Epiphanes in the time of the Greek kingdom. It was a literal 2300 literal days, 6.5 years. They said it had nothing to do with the end of time. That's why they take this prophecy in Daniel 9 and they put it in isolation. The problem, as I have been saying over and over, is that the book of Daniel is a series of prophecies where God repeats what he's saying 4 different times. It's the same time period, the same spaces of time, the same history that God goes over from 4 different perspectives. We can see this. But if you accept the interpretation that these other people are giving, you have to make it a disjointed set of prophecies. The cohesiveness is gone. Daniel 8 is not talking about the end of time. Daniel 9 here is not a part of an end time prophecy. It's just a hodgepodge of different prophecies, if you understand what I'm saying. This is why I always believe that if you can see the bigger picture, if you can see the big framework, you can know where to fit the pieces. But if you don't see that big picture, what you end up with is a hodgepodge of little bits and pieces that do not make a cohesive picture. Doesn't make sense. So it says, according to this interpretation now, the Antichrist, according to them, will confirm the covenant. He makes an agreement with the Jews. He makes a covenant with the Jews. This is a covenant that has nothing to do with any biblical covenant, according to them. According to them, the Antichrist makes a covenant with the Jews at the beginning of the 7 years, at the beginning of the 70th week. He will make a covenant with them for 1 week. In the midst of the week, this Antichrist will stop the Jews from offering their sacrifices. I would say if he does this, he's doing God a favor, right? According to them, the Jews are going to go back to offering sacrifices. That's why they are very interested in the Jews rebuilding their temple, because they believe that the Jews are going to go back to offering their sacrifices. The Antichrist makes a covenant with them for 7 years, and after 3.5 years, he's going to break his covenant. He's going to set up the abomination of desolation. He's going to stop the Jews from offering their sacrifices. This is what they believe. Yes, yes, Nikki.
So if the Antichrist supposedly makes a covenant, or first of all, if they believe that the Jews are going to be God's special people again in that time, why would God's special people be making a covenant with the Antichrist? And why would they need to go back to offering sacrifices since Jesus came if they're God's people in that time? Like, why would God even accept their sacrifices? It don't make sense.
I know it doesn't make sense, and I'm glad you see that it doesn't make sense. But um, according to the theory, is that they don't know that it is the Antichrist. All right, the Antichrist is, according to them, is going to be a great world leader, and they don't know he's the Antichrist. So he makes an agreement with the Jews. So that would answer why they make this covenant. Why do they go back to offering sacrifices? Because they don't believe in Jesus, right? What they are trying to do is reestablish the system of worship according to the story. According to the story, I'm telling you what they believe. The Antichrist, the Jews go back to offering the sacrifices and the oblations because they have gone back to their system of worship from the days of Moses. They believe that this is what it takes to be faithful to God, right? The Antichrist comes and the Antichrist breaks his covenant with them, and he stops them from offering sacrifices, and he becomes their enemy. According to the story, round about this time, they begin to acknowledge, they come to realize, they begin to open up to their understanding that Jesus is their Messiah. The persecution that the Antichrist brings upon them makes the Jews realize that Jesus is their Messiah, and they accept Jesus as the Messiah. And then Jesus comes, destroys the forces of the Antichrist, and saves the Jews. So this is the idea, and this is the basic thinking of the doctrine of the rapture. This is a basic framework of how that story goes. But
But you're saying that that already happened, and the he wasn't Antichrist, it was Jesus.
yes, the he, you can look at the same passage, and it makes a completely different sense if you understand that the he is the Messiah. Jesus confirmed the covenant with the Jews. That makes sense because he did not come to break God's covenant with the Jews, not until the end of God's, not until not until he died, not until the time of the new covenant, right? So he came and he confirmed the covenant. He said he didn't come to destroy the law or the prophets. So he confirmed the covenant in the midst of the week, before the end of the 70 weeks, before the end of the time period. He brought an end to the sacrifices. He made an end to the Jewish system of worship, even though they still had a little time left. But he made an end of the sacrifices because when he died, God was done with that system of worship. So the angel ripped the veil of the temple in two, demonstrating that God was finished with that system of worship. And Jesus, as he was leaving Jerusalem, he said he left it desolate. And so it was left desolate, and so desolations came upon the city 70 years later. Some of the prophecy was not fulfilled within that time frame of the 70 weeks, because even the desolations that came upon the city, it was AD 70. It was 40 years later. But Jesus said, the prophecy said, for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. He left it desolate. So from the time that Jesus died, the city was left desolate, and the sound of doom was coming, and the footsteps of disaster were already on the way, even though it was never fulfilled until 40 years later. But from the time that Jesus left, that sentence was hanging there.
Brother
David.
David.
The
Yeah,
40 years later was the 40 years later was when the Christians were being persecuted back then.
no, the persecution of Christians began shortly after Pentecost, but 40 years later was the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans. Actually, it was
Also,
about
that's
37 years later.
not like a prophetic thing that's like linked to the future. That's like a literal thing.
Yes, the destruction of Jerusalem, Jesus prophesied about it, right? He didn't give a time period. There was no time period that I can think of in the Bible that talks about when Jerusalem would be destroyed. What the prophecy says was that it would be left desolate. And what history tells us is that shortly after, about 30 something years later, nearly 40 years later, the city was destroyed. The Jews were wiped out, almost wiped out. They went away as slaves. Those that remained, the Romans took them away as slaves. So it was the end of Jerusalem.
Is that a parallel to the abomination of desolation in Revelation?
Yes, it has some connections. I'm not going to talk about it this evening because it's too complicated to deal with in the time that we have remaining. Maybe next week I will look at it because it's mentioned in this prophecy. We'll look at it next week.
Okay, so in other words, that verse that people think is the rapture and will happen in the future, all of those stuff already happened in the past.
Yes, the verse had nothing to do with the rapture. In order to get in order to get that interpretation, like I said, they dropped in a gap. They put a gap in the prophecy that has no business being there. Just out of the blue, you take 2,000 years and drop it. God said 70 years, and you make it 2,070 years, and you say the 2,000 years are invisible. They don't exist. You just drop that in there to make your prophecy fit. That's why I say it's one of the craziest interpretations of prophecy that I've ever come across. But anyway,
Okay,
as I
Brother
said,
David.
there are
490,
hundreds of thousands of
490.
Christians who believe it. Yes,
Ready, I'm
brother Patrick, I think.
Yeah, Brother David. Is there anywhere in the New Testament that the leadership knew what the ripping of the veil meant?
The Bible doesn't. There's nowhere in the Bible that I can think of where they it suggests that they had any idea of what it meant. I mean, the closest the Bible tells you about what went on through their mind is where they said it is appropriate that one man should die and not that the whole nation perish. And then John makes the comment that he said this because he was high priest and he was prophesying, even though he didn't know that he was prophesying. So maybe they had other situations like this where they kind of had discussions about why did the temple rip in two? What happened? You know how there were such liars that when Jesus was raised from the dead, they got the people to tell the Romans that their disciples came and stole the body. So I suspect that they would have found some way to rationalize what happened in the temple. But I can't think of anywhere where the Bible comments on it. Somebody else was saying something, but I didn't get the voice.
Over here, I wanted to say
I was
something.
just correcting you.
Okay.
You said
Yes.
70 years. I was just correcting. It was 490 years.
Thank you. Thank you. And it should have been 70 weeks. Yes. Before your brother Ray, let me just make the point because since Aaron brought it up, I know that it kind of messed me up a little bit too. Remember that the 70 years is different from the 70 weeks. The 70 years is the time that the Jews were captive in Babylon. The 70 weeks is really 490 years. And it's a time from the commandment to rebuild Jerusalem until the end of the Jewish age. 70 weeks were given to the Jews, 490 years. So I just wanted to emphasize that. Go ahead, Brother Ray.
Yeah, I just learned something. I love the way you been bringing these points out and the questions they've been asking because you give us an opportunity to look at things from a different perspective, from a higher point. And I just realized that gap space that you are talking about, that they are claiming that God put everything on hold, actually forfeits the entire Bible because that means then that these people that believe in the rapture theory believe that God never kept the promise with Israel because they were taken up to heaven before Israel was taken up. So I just wanted to think. I mean, it's something to think about. That means that God lied because then the Gentiles, we get the first fruits, the best. We go to heaven. We didn't get that promise. We get it. Then the Jews get the seconds. That doesn't make. And this just wow. Thank you, David. It just lit up the light bulb.
Okay, Brother Ray. I mean, that's another angle from which we can say the whole thing is wrong. But you look at it and there are so many points of view you can look at it and say it doesn't make sense. Um, I always say this, and I'm going to say it. I always say this that I still believe, with all the confusion that and the faults I find with the Seventh Adventist beliefs, with all of that, I still believe that there is a lot of value there. I've studied the Jehovah's Witness interpretation of prophecy. I have their book on Daniel and Revelation. Oh man, it is a pain to read. I've looked at Catholic interpretation of Revelation. It's a disaster. And I'm being kind. And you look at, this, for example, this interpretation of this gap, which is most of the other churches, right? And if you look at their interpretation of Revelation, I believe God had something to do with the beginning of the Advent movement. Don't look at the apostasy that has developed. Don't look at it and make that be your judge. And there are many people who have become disenchanted with Adventism, like I have become disenchanted. But you know what they do? They jump into the camp of the people who don't have any foundation and they start teaching the same kind of similar foolishness. It's wise to go to the Bible and look at what the Bible is saying and take everything on merit. Don't jump into camps. Don't jump from the frying pan into the fire. Don't line up yourself with Adventist or Catholic or Baptist or whatever. Look at each truth on its merit. The point I'm making is that, brothers and sisters, there is a pattern to Daniel. There's a pattern to Revelation. It's a story. And you can look at the storyboard and you can fit things in their place and it makes sense. You go to some of the interpretations out there and it's a hodgepodge all over the place. There is no sequence or rhyme or reason or sense to what is happening. This little prophecy here and this means this over here. There's no harmony. There's no harmonious development. It's kind of like the gospel. You know how it is with the gospel as we have been studying? You know how it is? You look at the gospel, and when you begin to understand it, you see that the two Adams, the kingdom, the two covenants, the truth about God, everything is like click. Everything goes together to give you a picture that makes sense. And if you take out something out of it, it begins to fall apart. But you have these groups out there, and they grab this and they grab this and they deny this. And the thing, I am very, very grateful to God for giving us a structure that we can follow. Because if you have a structure, anything that you get, you can fit it into place, or you can know it doesn't fit and you can discard it. So I'm saying, let us stick to the principle of testing everything by the word of God and not jumping into camps, not jumping into this on this bandwagon or that one. Just a little bit of
Brother Monroe.
yes, but yes,
But
go ahead.
where does the tribulation fit in Revelation? Because Revelation got two resurrections. The first resurrection, which is unto life, and the second resurrection, which is unto death. Where is that tribulation fits in? It didn't fit in no part of Revelation.
The tribulation is it's where the three angels' messages begin to be preached. Revelation 14. Remember, it says that in chapter 13 that the beast commands everybody to be killed who will not worship the beast. And it says he commands them. That is where the tribulation comes in. The angel says, the message says at that time, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from henceforth. So that's where the tribulation comes in. If you look, and that's where the 144,000 appears. And if you look at chapter 7, it says of the 144,000, these are they that have come out of the great tribulation. So it's that's the point in time where we have the tribulation.
When the seven last plagues are poured out, right, David?
Yes, that's before the seven last plagues, because it's during the time of the mark of the beast crisis. The seven last plagues come after that test.
Okay. Thanks, Brother David.
It
You're
comes
welcome.
after the tribulation, David, the seven last plagues. Oh, I thought the seven last plagues were during the time of tribulation.
Well,
No,
when we say tribulation, I mean it's relative, because first of all, tribulation is different for different people, right? When the saints are going through tribulation, the world will not be going through their tribulation. Why? Because we are going to be persecuted because we will not receive the mark of the beast and we will not worship the beast. That's why we'll be persecuted. So we will be suffering persecution. What about the world? They'll be comfortable because they are not being persecuted. Our tribulation is in the form of persecution. But what about the persecution what about the tribulation that will come upon them? It will be the seven last plagues. So you have different kinds of tribulation. For God's people, our tribulation is going to be being hunted as criminals. Maybe many of us losing our lives. That will be tribulation for God's people. But when we have gone through that test, then the Spirit of God leaves the earth, and then the world suffers the seven last plagues. That will be tribulation for the ungodly. So there are those two aspects to it, Brother Ray.